Before we start with this review, I have a couple things that I wanted to say. I have a Let's Play channel I'm currently trying to upload more frequently on, so if you could head over there and give me a follow, I would highly appreciate it. I also have a Facebook page dedicated to the channel, so if you want to follow that as well, there's a link to it in the description of my channel. I also have a Discord, so if you want to follow me on there, that would be cool as well. And last but not least, only a fraction of my viewers are actually subscribed to the channel, so if you would like to hit that subscribe button and click the bell for further notifications, I would highly appreciate that. But anyways, enough stalling, let's move on now to the actual review. Life is Strange 2 was released in 2018, 3 years after the first game came out and a whole year after Before the Storm hit store shelves. Unlike its predecessor, which behaved more like a prequel than it did anything else, Life is Strange 2 is instead a sequel to the events of the first game and follows an entirely new cast of important characters. I for one feel as though that this was a great decision to make, as it makes the universe feel less limited in that regard, and the last thing you want to do in a franchise like this is start overusing characters that you've already utilized by now. But I think the overall impact of this decision has less to do with making new characters, and more so, just how good these new characters actually are. And there is no question in my mind that the characters we have in this game are easily up there with some of my favorites from the first game. Life is Strange 2 follows the story of two brothers, Sean and Daniel Diaz, who must make their way to Mexico after the unexpected loss of their father leads them on a road full of hardships and homelessness. Throughout their experiences along their journey, the game also takes the brilliant opportunity to really flesh out the dynamic between the two Diaz brothers. At first, the relationship is like any other brotherly dynamic. From Sean's perspective, it's obvious that he always cared about his younger brother Daniel, but more often than not found himself usually getting annoyed and pissed off by his little brother's antics. And while this does reign true throughout the rest of the game, their relationship does take quite a turn after the unexpected passing of their father, with Sean ultimately taking on the role of the more responsible and protective brother. And a good portion of the choices you make throughout this game reflect around this change as well. Unlike Life is Strange Before the Storm, which in my opinion had choices and consequences that didn't really add any weight to the overall outcome of the story, Life is Strange 2's choices and consequences are instead amplified in this matter. And each choice you make throughout the game feels like it is taken into account greatly, even if it was made many episodes ago. We haven't even started the game yet, and already we're being asked about the choices we made in the first game. Yeah, they even go as far as to honor the legacy of the first game, which is phenomenal, and believe me, I'll have more great things to say about that later on in the review. But yeah, the choices in this game revolve around things like making sure Daniel doesn't eat red berries that will make him sick, choosing whether or not to steal items from a gas station, and even choosing whether or not to allow Daniel to swear. It's little choices like these that greatly affect the dynamic between these two, as they influence Daniel's morality and whether or not he views Sean as a good or bad influence. Now, they did try to implement something similar to this with Chloe and Rachel's dynamic in Life is Strange Before the Storm, but in my opinion, it was far less impactful, and considering how the first game would later play out, meant that a lot of the alterations you can make really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But here, it's the exact opposite. I mean, even little things like a short interaction with a scorpion in episode 5 will greatly showcase just how much Daniel was impacted by the good or bad outcomes of Sean's decisions. But among the consequences of Sean's leadership towards Daniel lies a whole plethora of other characters that also need discussing. Of course, you can't mention the Diaz brothers without mentioning their father, Esteban Diaz. Like William from the first Life is Strange, Esteban doesn't really have that many scenes in this game, but the impact that he leaves on the two brothers is easily the most memorable aspect of his character. One of the most memorable scenes with Esteban is, believe it or not, at the very start of the game. Sean finds Esteban in the garage, fixing him a car for his graduation party. Sean then explains that he's going to a party later that night and admits that he will need some money. And depending on the dialogue choices you make here will affect how much money Esteban gives you. The conversation then ends with Esteban requesting one big and final hug from Sean. And I just want to say that this one singular choice is more impactful than any of the choices made in Before the Storm. It's one of those reflective choices you can make, and it actually kind of reminds me of how the first Life is Strange handled its choices and consequences through reflective dialogue. I can only recall a couple occasions where this happened in Before the Storm, and I don't believe I ever remembered feeling like it actually made my choices matter in that game. But yeah, speaking of dialogue, that's another aspect of this game that I want to praise. Now, to be fair, there is still some cringy dialogue here and there, just like the first two games. In particular, I saw some people complaining about the way Sean's voice actor, Gonzalo Martin, executes some of his dialogue in the game. And while I do understand where they were coming from, I do think it's important for people to look into the perspective of Daniel for this matter. He's a young kid at heart with a wild imagination, which is how a lot of young kids act in real life. And I think that some of his childlike dialogue kinda rubs off on Sean, with the latter using it as a way to feel closer to his younger brother, which ends up resulting in dialogue that, for lack of a better term, might feel cringy at times. But even with the cringy dialogue, I still think it works, and I think it's only amplified by their dynamic throughout the duration of the game. But going back to Esteban for a minute, I would like to talk about his death scene. Like I said earlier, it's a pretty impactful scene, made even more impactful by how it affects the two brothers throughout their journey. The basic gist of it is that this dickhead right here gets super pissed off at Daniel after he spills fake blood all over him. He then starts threatening and insulting him, but not long before Sean steps in to defend his little brother. The two start engaging in a fist fight with the cops getting involved, and that is what ultimately leads to the tables being turned for these two brothers. It's also the first time in the game where, like Max from the first Life is Strange, Daniel is shown to have some unique, incredible powers of his own, as the image of his father being shot sent him in a rage of fury and destruction, knocking himself and everyone else out with a telekinetic blast that ultimately killed the officer who shot his father. As a result of the trauma he dealt with, Daniel doesn't seem to recall any of these events taking place, and he spends the majority of the first episode questioning his brother's antics and ultimately trying to find out why his father is not with them, which ultimately leads to the big revelation by the end of said episode. It's a great scene in my opinion, and it really shows just how far these two brothers have come in the span of only 4 days. I think the only break that they really had was during their walk through the woods near the beginning of the episode, which also highlights another praiseworthy aspect of this game, the detail. What can I say really, it's just as good as it was in the first two games. Many of the notes and journal entries that you can find in this game are highly detailed, the graphics are great, and I love the little Easter eggs and references sprinkled throughout the experience. There's even a reference to the clicker enemies from The Last of Us, which is great.
You see that? Looks like a clicker. Creepy.
What the hell is that? I should have listened in biology class.
Stop it.
You can even make drawings in your journal entries now, which is also pretty cool. Again, just like the shirts in Before the Storm, they don't really add much to the experience, but they are a new form of collectible, and they are handy if you want some extra trophies or achievements. But yeah, if you couldn't tell already, I'm having a very difficult time trying to find anything remotely negative about this game, and it only gets better from here. The music being a prime example. The makers of these games sure do know how to implement music that perfectly captures the situation playing out on screen. It's great stuff, and it's honestly only a part of what makes games like this so special. Speaking of special, it looks like Daniel is not the only character in this game who possesses unique and incredible powers. There's actually a demo that was released a few months before any of this game's episodes even existed. It's called The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, and the experience is only a few hours long. In it, you play as a young kid named Chris Erickson, who spends one Saturday morning living out his imaginations and pretending to be a superhero. He lives with his father named Charles Erickson, who is an alcoholic and tends to neglect his son. He also has a tendency to abuse him given the bruise that Chris has on his arm. After Chris's dad serves him breakfast with eggs that look like they came straight out of a third world country, we begin our journey by setting out to complete the various quests on our awesome things to do list. I want to give massive props to Don't Nod on this one. The amount of storytelling and lore that you can learn from just exploring the environment in this demo is incredible. There's also a lot of great references as well, like how one of the books that the Erickson family owns was apparently written by Mark Jefferson from the first game. It also very subtly builds up the plot of what the main story of this game would later focus on. Grief, depression, anger, but also through detailing the events of Esteban's murder before Sean and Daniel were even established as our main characters. It's also worth noting that the voice actor for Charles here is the same guy who provided the voice for Frank Bowers in Before the Storm. Also being the current voice actor for Leon Kennedy for those of you Resident Evil fans out there who are watching this video. Speaking of which, while it's unclear if the following scene is a reference to Resident Evil, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case considering what I just said a few moments ago.
Headshot!
Ow, cheap shot. I'm going down. You can't kill the zombie jock.
No way! That was a headshot!
I am a super zombie.
Well, I'm a superhero!
Can't argue with that. Zombie down.
Captain Spirit strikes back.
But yeah, I also got massive Toy Story vibes watching Chris play with all his action figures near the beginning of the demo, which was pretty cool. The one thing that wasn't cool, however, was trying to figure out this damn phone code, which actually proved to be quite annoying. It was a pain in the ass to figure out, but through researching I did find out that the code has something to do with spelling the word hot dog on a phone keypad. I wish they could have made it something different, but I guess it makes sense considering what the code actually does. And aside from that, that's really the only negative thing I have to say about this experience. But another cool thing about this demo is that the choices and consequences made here will actually carry over into the main events of Life is Strange 2. But I think the best part about this demo is how it takes characters who otherwise have a somewhat memorable impact on the story and molds them into more significant purposes with sentimental value. Sure, the actual story is mostly unaffected by this demo, but for what it's worth, I think Captain Spirit does a pretty good job at introducing a whole new meaning to character dynamics that otherwise, without context, are mostly seen as just good world building for the plot of the main story. For instance, the problem that I had with a lot of the characters in Before the Storm is how poorly utilized they were. A character like Steph, for example, may have had a likable personality and redeemable character traits, but in terms of story, really didn't have any impact on the overall plot of the game. That's why I didn't mention her in my review of that game, because I genuinely couldn't think of anything noteworthy to say about her due to how insignificant she was in that game's story. The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit proves that not only did the developers learn from their mistakes in the previous game, but it also proves that there is significant value in the main characters, and most importantly, in the supporting roles as well. When we first meet Chris Eriksen in the main story, it is actually revealed to be Daniel's powers that saved him. And all the times where he thought he had powers were nothing more than just figments of his imagination. This plays into the whole morality aspect that I mentioned earlier, and the consequences are dire here if you end up making the wrong choice. During your time with Chris and Charles, you'll also come across two other characters, Cassidy Jones and Finn McNamara. Homeless freight hoppers who at first are introduced as nothing more than just simple background characters. But fitting in nicely with the ending of episode 2, Cassidy and Finn start to become more integral to the experience by the time episode 3 comes into play. Not just these two, but a whole plethora of new characters are also added to the mix. As it turns out, these guys are actually part of a group whom work for a man named Jonathan Merrill, a real piece of work who owns a pot farm in California. Their job is simple: do whatever the man tells them to do. And of course, when I say them, I'm also referring to Sean and Daniel, as the dynamics involving these new characters will act as a huge testament to their brotherhood. Honestly, I really enjoyed playing through this episode and watching the events unfold and play out here. Not only is the dynamic between Sean and Daniel as intriguing as ever to watch, but it's also made even more impactful based on the interactions that they have with the other characters. Their interactions with Finn McNamara being a prime example. At one point in the episode, Finn decides to take Daniel out near the lake to show him how to properly throw knives and is amazed by Daniel's seemingly perfect throwing knife accuracy. Unbeknownst to Finn, it was actually just Daniel abusing his powers again, similar to what he did with Chris Eriksen. This of course causes a debacle for both Sean and Daniel, and while it's never made particularly obvious, it's pretty clear that Sean was getting jealous of Finn's influence on Daniel. Not because the two were hanging out together, but because of how Daniel looked up to him. This actually plays into Sean's dynamic with Cassidy, where she actually calls him out on the fact. Ironically, Daniel also seemed jealous of Sean's dynamic with Cassidy. However, unlike Sean's case, Daniel actually showed it. I think deep down this episode highlights just how close these two brothers have become. What once were two kids whom, at best, only got along because of their father's influence on their dynamic, were now feeling betrayed by the other because they dared to even have a connection with another person. You also gotta remember too that prior to the events of this episode, these two were on the run together trying to get away from the police. And this is the first time since episode 1 where they are welcomed into what is a seemingly normal life, feeling free to do whatever they wanted. Also, and this goes without saying, but they spent the entirety of the first 2 episodes in each other's company. So when you have someone like Finn borrowing his little brother without even asking for his permission, that's definitely going to set off some emotions within Sean. Like, wow, I just spent all this time bonding with my little brother like I never have before, only for him to start hanging out and looking up to someone whom he's barely ever even met before. All of this does, however, work in Finn's favor because he later realizes this and admits that he should have gotten Sean's permission beforehand. His apology and the fact that Daniel looked up to him so much, as well as the fact that he is the literal reason why these two are here to begin with, are all what helped Sean get along so well with Finn. And if you want to take it a step further, you can even romance the guy, which I did by complete accident. But you can also romance Cassidy as well, which I actually think works better since Sean appeared to show signs of liking her from the very start. Another interesting note about Sean and Cassidy's dynamic is that at one point in the episode, Cassidy actually volunteers to make a tattoo for Sean. I'll admit, it's definitely not the best wolf drawing I've seen in my life, but I'll give Cassidy props here and say it's definitely better than anything I could ever draw, that's for damn sure. That, and it does fit in nicely with the theme of the overall narrative. Each episode in the game, with the exception of episode 1, starts off with an illustrated story played over Sean's narration. There's a lot of great symbolism in this story, such as how the 2 lone wolves are meant to represent both Sean and Daniel, and the part about the hunters taking away their papa wolf is meant to represent their father's death. The wolf symbol is also implemented in the actual game itself, being used in certain dialogue choices. It's usually meant to represent when a critical choice is made that will impact one or both of the brothers. Speaking of which, the ending of episode 3 is definitely a prime example. At the end of the episode, the group sets out to rob Meryl's house and steal contents from his safe. We utilize Daniel's powers here to knock out the security cameras in order to maintain as much stealth as possible. However, to make a long story short, the heist gets completely butchered, literally, as Sean has now lost the use of his left eye and is completely separated from his little brother. At the start of the next episode, Sean wakes up in the hospital and is as determined as ever to find out what happened to Daniel. He devises a plan to break out of the hospital and has a brief encounter with Finn, depending on if whether or not he survived the previous episode's butchered heist. Feeling as responsible as ever for his mistakes, Finn apologizes to Sean for getting him and Daniel involved in this shit show. And since he was a great friend and looked up highly to the two brothers, I chose to forgive him. After all, I'm sure there's somebody else in Sean's life whom he'd rather blame for all this mess. But we'll get back to her later. But with all that being said, Sean escapes from the hospital and makes his way towards Haven Point, Nevada. He learns in a letter from Jacob that this is where Daniel was taken to after the previously failed heist. Jacob being one of the members of the group that Daniel and Sean were a part of in the previous episode. Unfortunately for Sean, however, getting to Haven Point is more difficult than it seems, as the car he stole from the hospital eventually runs out of gas on the way there. But, still as determined as ever to find Daniel, he continues on foot through the Nevada desert. Keep his determination in mind, as it does become important later on. After receiving a lift from a truck driver, Sean eventually arrives at the Universal Uprising Church, where he finally learns what happened to Daniel. It turns out that the church had met and took an extreme liking to Daniel, so much so that they deemed his powers as Christ-like and ended up using him for their donations. There's a lot of new faces that we meet in this episode, such as Jacob's family outside the church. We also meet the church's head pastor, and as someone who grew up in a Christian school, I personally think she was portrayed very accurately, deceiving her followers into thinking that she was using Daniel for a good cause, when in reality, she was only using him for her own selfish benefits. But Daniel was not the only one who was treated wrongfully by the church, as Jacob seemed to have experienced a lot of trauma stemming from the church itself. As it turns out, Jacob is actually homosexual, and if you know anything about Christians in real life, then you know how low their tolerance level is for that sort of thing. As a result, the church had essentially forced him into gay conversion therapy, casting him out and essentially treating him as if there was a literal demon inside of him. As you could imagine, this did not sit well at all with Jacob, so much so that it ended up causing him to try and commit suicide. Sound familiar? And as if the church couldn't make themselves look any worse, it is revealed at one point in the story that Jacob's little sister suffers from pneumonia, a fact that the head pastor was made well aware of but refused to help her with because she believed that faith alone would cure her. It's all pretty diabolical stuff. However, fortunately, you can offer Jacob some money to get his sister the help that she actually needs later on in the story. But yeah, if you ask me, I think this lady deserves to be buried beneath the scum pile that Mark Jefferson later ended up in. I honestly don't know which one is worse, using a kid to get donations or refusing to let a sick child get medical treatment despite her condition. And to think this entire time that Sean had his hatred set out for somebody else. Up until the events of episode 4, while Sean and Daniel's father had pivotal time on screen, there isn't much we know, let alone see, about their mother. The closest that we ever get to knowing her is by finding various collectibles throughout the game, or by hearing about her through the game's various dialogue choices. These are easily some of the most interesting parts of the game in my opinion, and I would like to talk about them in greater detail, but for the sake of spoilers, I'll leave it up to you guys as to whether or not you decide to experience it for yourself. That, and I honestly think it's more effective as opposed to hearing somebody else just talking about it. But yeah, for a good duration of the game, she was mostly just portrayed as a ghost of the past, and throughout that time, Sean showed little to no interest in ever wanting to see her face again. So it's safe to say that during his time in Haven Point, she was the last person he expected to ever run into out of all people. But considering the current situation with Daniel, it was probably a blessing in disguise. After a brief encounter outside the Uprising Church, Sean's mother, named Karen, eventually convinces him to come stay at the motel she was residing in. During that time, she also brings in a few favors for Sean, such as a fresh pair of clothes and an eye patch. But it isn't until she arrives back at the motel that the truth is finally set free. Karen explains that the reason why she left was due to the fact that she felt trapped in her marriage with Esteban. She fully admits that she wasn't meant to be a mom or a wife, and that her and Esteban did attend therapy in order to address the issue, but to no avail. As harsh as it all may sound, she does confirm that she still cared deeply about her family, and that the decision to leave was a mutual one made by both her and Esteban. It was a difficult choice to make, and it's easy to see that considering how Sean talks about her for the first half of the game. Based on his own perception, she left without even trying essentially, so he felt it wasn't even necessary to care or want to see her at all. It's totally understandable why Sean would feel that way, but at the same time, those favors she did for him, plus even little things like remembering what he likes to eat and, I don't know, the fact that she was literally willing to let him stay at the motel she was in, proves that, at least in my opinion, there is still some good left in Karen after all. Plus, you also have to consider the fact that this is the same universe where that crazy head pastor from the Uprising Church also exists. A lady who not only went as far as to let her own selfish desires control her, but even going as far as letting them cause harm for the people she was around as well. A fact that might have been deemed as forgivable if she did not use kids in the process. That shit alone is just something that I personally cannot forgive. And I think it's another situation where you really have to pick which one is the lesser evil. Kind of like a similar scenario that took place in the first game. A character like David Madsen might have been seen as nothing more than a creepy asshole, sure. The way he stalks certain students throughout the school and the fact that he literally went as far as hitting his own stepdaughter were all definitely questionable aspects of his career. But after reflecting on the entire experience, I have to ask one simple question. Was David Madsen really as bad as someone like Mark Jefferson? I mean, this guy literally built his career around kidnapping and drugging innocent girls. And he's the last person you would expect to do something like that, which means that his entire photography career was built solely on furthering that idea. I'm not at all saying that David was perfect, but he's easily a saint in comparison to Jefferson. But yeah, with that being said, going back to Life is Strange 2, I personally think that Karen was worth forgiving. There's actually a great reason why I compared her to David Madsen, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. But getting back to our story, I think it's time we finally conclude episode 4 in what is easily one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire game. After Daniel gets brainwashed by the head pastor, Sean and Karen eventually return to the church in an effort to convince Daniel of what he's truly dealing with. But Daniel refuses to hear them out due to the pastor's influence. But despite this, Sean is as determined as ever to get his little brother back, and is even willing to take a beating from the pastor's right-hand man in the process. This is such a powerful scene in my opinion because, similar to the ending of episode 1, it really does a great job at displaying how far these brothers have come on their journey. As yet another reminder, at the very beginning of the game, their brotherly dynamic was about as ordinary as it could get. And Sean wasn't even willing to give Daniel a Choco Crisp bar for Christ's sake. So the fact that Sean was literally willing to get beat up in the process of trying to prove a point to his little brother proves that their brotherly dynamic has done way more than just evolve. And luckily for Sean, his plan worked, because as soon as the pastor's enforcer was about to shoot him, Daniel intervenes and the two make their beloved reunion once and for all. They set off once again for Puerto Lobos, killing the pastor and setting fire to the uprising church in the process. And with that, we have officially concluded episode 4. As for the next episode, it is one hell of a roller coaster ride. The brothers have been through quite the journey and are now currently residing in Arizona, in a little community called Away, which is a pretty interesting name if I might add. This is actually their mother's home, and it's filled to the brim with new faces and interactions. However, easily the most interesting part about this place is that one of the residents is actually a very recognizable face. David Madsen, the creepy security guard from Blackwell and the guy that saved Max's life in the first game. As you can no doubt tell, he is one of the residents here in Away, and he actually became good friends with Karen. His role in this game is a minor one, however, it is far from forgettable. You know, it was always kind of interesting because in the first game, if you went with the Sacrifice Arcadia Bay option, it was kind of assumed that everyone died except Max and Chloe. But this game seems to confirm the existence of other people who also survived the infamous storm that wiped out Arcadia Bay. And obviously, David Madsen was one of those survivors. However, if you watch my review on the first Life is Strange, then you likely know that I chose to sacrifice Chloe at the very end of the game. So, for consistency's sake, I decided to go with that option for my playthrough of this game. Still though, I think the idea of there being multiple survivors is a great one, as it opens up more breathing room for great storytelling to be done with this franchise. Speaking of which, it should come as no surprise that the storytelling here is at an all-time high. I love how David compares Sean's dynamic with Daniel to the relationship he had with Chloe in his past life. It's very fitting seeing as how they were both put in very similar situations, and in fact they both ironically dealt with grieving the loss of a father as well. Another great detail about this scene is how it allows us to build our sympathies for David. David admits that he wasn't perfect and that maybe he could have handled his relationship with Chloe a little bit differently. However, one can make the argument that for the situations that David was placed in, it was necessary for him to be stern, even if he did take it pretty far at times. But I think most importantly that, despite all of David's flaws, he's certainly not the worst character that we've encountered so far in this story. I also think it's great how all of this provides a fresh new outlook for Sean, something that plays a very important role in the final choice made at the very end of the game. I also really enjoyed getting to explore David's RV, as it's basically just fan service for those of us who played the first game. I enjoyed hearing Sean comment about the various characters seen in these pictures, even if some of them involved characters that I wasn't particularly fond of. So yeah, overall, seeing David Madsen again here in Life is Strange 2 proved to be a very special moment. But seeing as how we have progressed over 30 minutes into this review, I think it's about time we finally start to wrap things up. After months of staying in Away with their mother, Sean and Daniel are finally back on the road once again after they learn that police activity is growing strong near their area. David provides them with a police scanner and a map to help aid them on their journey. Karen makes the ultimate sacrifice by giving herself up to the authorities for Sean and Daniel's sake. They say their goodbyes to the other members of Away, and with that, they have officially began their journey towards the border. But it's not over yet, because as soon as you think the story is about to wrap up and all is sunshine and rainbows for the brothers, the game throws at you what is probably the most baffling curveball ever.
Can't wait to go shopping. I'm dying to get some Choco Crisp. It'll be
Daniel! Daniel! Daniel, talk to me! Daniel! Talk to me! No way, not now!
Long story short, everything starts to go downhill, as the brothers are now separated once again, and Sean now faces the looming threat of potentially facing jail time. All the while, not even knowing if his brother had made it out alive to begin with. But as it turns out, Daniel is fine, as he quickly comes to Sean's rescue. We utilize Daniel's powers here once again to help aid the brothers' ability to escape, and after everything goes down, we finally arrive at the last big decision made in the story. From what I can gather, there are 7 possible endings you can get in this game's epilogue, which is wild. I won't spoil all of them, but the one I did get happened to be the ending where Sean and Daniel finally made it to Puerto Lobos. I'm not sure if this is the best ending, but considering the journey that these two have been on, I'm happy with the way this one played out. Basically, years down the line, we see the brothers utilizing their own auto repair shop, with Daniel also utilizing his powers to help keep the shop and his brothers safe. While this may have been seen as a good ending, it does come at the cost of low morality, which explains the newspaper clipping at the beginning highlighting a gang confrontation. They aren't just referring to the other gang members, but in fact, they're also referring to Sean and Daniel. While it is unfortunate that the brothers aren't able to enjoy their future in peace, it is nice to see that they are able to defend themselves instead of having to run away all the time. Something that clearly couldn't be said before. And while it is unfortunate that neither of their parents could be there to aid them in this new life, considering everything that they've been through, let's just say that it could have definitely been a lot worse. And based on what I've seen from the other endings, it only makes me happier that I got this one instead. And with that, we have officially completed Life is Strange 2. Overall, what more can I say? This was a very solid experience in my opinion. I enjoyed watching this brotherly dynamic unfold as much as I enjoyed watching Max and Chloe's relationship evolve in the first game. I also enjoyed how a lot of the supporting cast were handled as well, and seeing how their interactions with the brothers changed the overall course of the journey, whether it was through big or even smaller changes in the grand scheme of things. And admittedly, there's plenty of other characters that I probably should have mentioned in this review, but going back to something I said earlier, I think this is a story that's best experienced from a blind perspective. And I can easily say after playing through it myself that this is a story that's definitely worth experiencing if you have the chance. And unlike our last experience that we dabbled in, even though I still have a soft spot for the first game, there is no question in my mind that Life is Strange 2 is not just a well-deserved sequel to that experience, it is an undeniable masterpiece and has everything that made me fall in love with the first game. And that is why I am very happy to give it the final rating of an 8 out of 10.